Okay, and I apologise for the start of this meeting and the chaos that must have created a little bit more panic attack in Brendan after his busy day. I acknowledge that we are all living on Aboriginal lands. In my case, at the moment, Dharawal land, but I know we're over a number of sites. Acknowledge the owners past and present, and hope that we are still helping to maintain the lands to the level to which the local peoples had done so for many years. Brendan, it's a great pleasure to have you here for this particular briefing to the NPA membership. You've got Gary Dunnett about to listen to you as well, so he has a fair few things on board. I don't see at this stage Debbie Andrew.
No, Debbie gave her apologies actually,
Did
Brian.
she? But
Yeah,
she has sent you an awful lot
she
of
has.
questions, which no doubt you will be able to raise during this session. Okay. And if I have missed a whole pile of emails from all sorts of people about this, forgive me. I've spent a fortnight exploring national parks, travelling stock reserves, and state forests in and around everywhere between Wagga and Balranald, including Mungo National Park. I not only welcome Brendan, but I welcome Vera, who comes with high praise. And at this stage, at 7:13, because this could be a long and shared discussion, I'll open it over to Brendan to begin proceedings, or flick it straight to Vera, whichever is his desire.
I'll jump in there first. Thanks, Brian. First of all, just acknowledge that all of this work was conducted on Darawal lands in Royal Heathcote Garrawarra State Conservation Area. It's an amazing opportunity to continue sort of working and sharing some of the knowledge and findings that we have from this project with so many interested parties. It's been a really exciting program to be involved with, and I've kind of described it as, some of these little secrets still being let out to us in dribs and drabs as we learn more about the reserve. Um, there are probably the easiest thing for me to say about this whole program is while there will be elements that people don't agree with methodologies on, while there'll be elements where things could have been tackled in slightly different ways, fundamentally, we know more about the reserves as a result of this project than we did before they were starting. And that's in terms of a deal of subtlety around where certain species can be found, around their relative abundances. And we also know a little bit about the work that is still to come and the efforts that we still need to apply to continue to protect these important areas in Sydney's south. Vera, if you're able to share. Excellent. So Vera tackles off the first bit, and I'll jump in and answer any questions as they come up until we tap out. But thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for having us. As Brendan described, I'm just going to give a bit of introduction on our scorecard program, and then Brendan will kind of give the more local perspective. And firstly, just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Dharawal people, and all the lands that we come from and stand on. The Ecological Health Performance Scorecard Program, also known as the Scorecards Program, or internally we just get called Eco Health, which is probably a word you might have heard bandied around, has a number of corporate objectives. So the first one is to improve our understanding of the ecological health of New South Wales national parks. So no easy task. And AI companion, got it. And no small task either. So just in comparison to other department programs, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. So you all would have heard of the Saving Our Species program, which has been running for 8 years now. So the objective of that program is to maximise the number of threatened species that are secure in the wild in New South Wales for 100 years. And then the Assets of Intergenerational Significance, the AIS program, is a program which gives legislative protection to the most important habitat for threatened species. And these are protected through conservation action plans, which set out key risks, priority actions to measure and report on the health of threatened species. So different objectives, different ways of managing conservation assets and different conservation assets. So the second objective of the Scorecards program is to improve conservation outcomes by reporting data-driven metrics for park managers to consider in their decision-making. So compared to the other two threatened species programs, and the Scorecards program includes threatened species, but it's not just threatened species. One of the big differences, I think, with this program is that it's really been designed to work directly with park managers, and the reporting, which has not been great out of the Saving Our Species program or the AIS program, which is relatively new, is very important in this program. And as you would probably know, we've already published, even though it was a bit overdue, the first scorecard and scorecard report. So that's a big part of the program and a very important part of the program. And the reason for that is to increase public transparency through the publication of this documentation. So the program, at the moment, it's called a pilot, not pilot program, and it involves 8 large park areas. So these are single parks or park aggregates. So Royal Heathcote Garrawarra was the first one, followed by Kosciuszko, Myall Lakes, Northern Forests, Greater Blue Mountains, Pilliga Warrumbungles, and yet to come, Macquarie Marshes and Narriara Thurley Downs. So in total, over 2.5 million hectares of land, of wild landscapes, which represents 30% of Park Estate in New South Wales. Royal Heathcote Garrawarra is the smallest. It's the first. We often do pilot studies in that. And the largest is the other one I'm actually responsible for, which is the Greater Blue Mountains at 842,000 hectares. Very large and quite remote, a lot of it. So these are the sites. This is what we've done so far. We've installed 473 surveillance monitoring sites, 40 in Royal Heathcote Garrawarra, 100 in Kosciuszko, 57 in Myall Lakes, 67 in Northern Forests, 87 in Pilliga and Warrumbungle, and 122 in Blue Mountains. So what is captured? So I guess one of the big differences between the threatened species programs and this program is we actually look at faunal diversity and occupancy across these large landscapes. So we look at species guilds, vertebrate groups, species lost since European settlement. We also include metrics on conservation assets. So these could be threatened species or communities. They could also be indicator species which are not threatened or indicator groups. We look at vegetation conditions. So we have full floristic plots at each of our sites, and also look at tree density and structure and function. So I guess for those who are familiar with the BAM survey methodology, it's BAM plus a bit more. We look at ecological processes. So we also sample water quality and soil health and relate that to the diversity of things that we find. And ecological threat, so feral animals, weeds, fire, and disease. And all these things are combined with a very collaborative approach in consultation with local parks area staff, branch staff, local species experts, and developed into ecological health monitoring plans for each site. So this is how we collect our data, which is a lot. So we have our own program which collects data, which is those sites that I put up before. They're called park-wide, we call them park-wide surveillance sites. So these sites are stratified in each of those areas by vegetation, community, and fire history, and constrained by access. We try not to have sites more than 500 metres away from a established track or trail. We also do our own single species or species guild projects, and these could be threatened or common species, which are often indicator or keystone species. And we do derive a lot of metrics from existing programs, from the Saving Our Species programs, AIS program, from our koala programs, and anywhere we can get them, really. So this is what our park-wide surveillance monitoring looks like. So we have a 2-hectare plot within the bush, so at least 100 meters away from a track or trail. And within the 2-hectare plot, we have a 1-hectare plot in which we place 4 different cameras. So the cameras are set up to collect different size fauna. So we have a close focus one for your antechinus and your rats. We have with a peanut butter and oats lure. We have a longer focus one for medium-sized mammals, macropods, wombats. We have a medium focus one, which we put a meat lure on, or we didn't do this in Royal though, because we don't think quolls are there, but who knows, they might be. And then we have a far-focused camera to pick up ferals along a predator trail. We also install 2 different audio devices, one which is ultrasonic for microbats and also an audio device for birds, with targeting night birds especially, and yellow-bellied gliders. So we do diurnal bird transects, which a lot of them are going on at the moment because it's spring, along a 200-metre transect. That's our veg plot, 20 by 20 full floristic, a 20 by 50 tree density plot, and a 50-metre point intersect transect, which looks at vegetation structure. We collect an awful lot of data. So for Royal, we've done 2 seasons of data, so 2022 and 23. We collected over 1.5 million images, which once they were sorted, produced over 300,000 fauna images, over 6,000 flora records, 40 water quality samples, over 250,000 audio files, 2,500 bird records, and 200 soil calls. And then came Kosciuszko, which had 4 million images, out of which they got over 500,000 fauna records. Mile Lakes, over 1 million images. Blue Mountains, 3.6 million. Great Northern Forests, 3.6 million. I think I just said that. Pilliga, 2.3 million. Blue Mountains, 2.3. And yet to come, Macquarie Marshes and Nariala Thurler Downs. So basically we collect an awful lot of data. We process it ourselves mostly. It takes us a lot of time. Some of it we're partway through. Other stuff we fully process it, and there's still a lot to come. And the product is the scorecard. So hopefully all of you have seen the stuff on the website published for Royal Heathcote and Garrawarra. So basically the scorecard is a table full of metrics which are meant to reflect the ecological health of parks. So those diversity metrics, there's metrics for single species, for fire, for predators. It's a table with a lot of numbers and words, which is not always for everyone. So we do have a report which is long, but it does have a lot of graphics in it. So with people who are more visually oriented, the scorecard has a lot of maps and charts of the different metrics that we collect. We also have in train, and hopefully published soon, a interactive Power BI. So I hope this will work. Let's see. So if we just go back there, this is what it's going to look like. So you can choose your site. So at the moment, they're building Royal Heathcote, Garrawarra and Kosciuszko, but we'll look at the RHG one. So you go into the data, and they're the 40 sites, and we can pick animal monitoring. So for example, let's just choose all mammals. It shows the diversity of mammals at the different sites. And we can do the same for birds or ferals and plants. We can do similar pictures. We can choose single species or multiple species. So that's going to be really good for people who want to drill down into the data at a lot more detail. And then over to Brendan.
Thanks, Vera. I was actually just watching the way that this scorecard Power BI clicks through. It's been a little bit of a work in progress, but it'll be great when that's up and running. So a couple of points I'll make just as a brief introduction to the findings is that, we've taken best efforts where possible to kind of collate all of the preceding information to make sure that we've got the most accurate data sets possible. I'm certain that there's errors in some of it, but it's best efforts with the time and resources available. I think as a starting point, there was a flag jammed into the sand that says we're comparing against nominally that 1750 timestamp against species diversity. And so, as you can see in the data set, we believe that over the last period of, 230 odd years, I haven't got my shoes off, so I can't do the maths off the top of my head. We've seen that there have been a number of species not detected here, and it's probably around about 9 species or so that haven't been recorded. As an indication of scribbling a list down off the top of my head, we didn't get records of Ricali. We had no eastern grey kangaroos recorded during this work, no quoll records. Paddy melon, I think, was one of the other species that was on the earlier lists. There was also long-nosed potteroo, and nor have we seen greater glider turn up in these rounds of surveys. So that's kind of adding to that an indicative list of the species that we've lost there. Noting that we've had a few species detections that have, I won't say added to the total diversity, but have kind of infilled some species that we didn't think we'd had recorded in that time. I think what's really exciting is that we actually have a remarkably robust and comparatively diverse ground fauna still kicking around in these 3 reserves. It is, when I first started in the gig down at Royal, we were quite excited about the odd long-nosed bandicoot record that was popping up, but this data set has shown us that they're quite well distributed across the reserve. Now, this is obviously in the context of no fox control over many years, so we were expecting to see some impact on those small ground-dwelling mammals, which are super tasty for that introduced predator. But that's sort of, I won't say not the case, but we are seeing really good diversity records still. So we've still got, and the highlight for me remains wombats. I know it's not particularly exciting, but we still keep getting those incidental scattering of wombat records through Heathcote and Royal. In fact, we had another one just today, which is great. So we've also got good records of dusky antechinus coming up, and they are recorded infrequently, but enough. Eastern pygmy possums are probably one of the highlights out of this report because of their relative abundance and distribution across all of the reserves. And it's a really important species. It's not a site managed species, it's a landscape managed species, and the combination of fire regimes and just, I think, to some extent, the quality of habitat that's bouncing around in Royal for that species is really setting it up as an important place for that species conservation. There's a comment there about the yellow-belly sheath-tail bat, but I have had a look through Deb's feedback, and there's a suggestion of a record from 2001, which was a body that was recorded. So, as I said, we'll just kind of work through some of those variations, but these were calls detected in the park, so we've got live beasties flying around there too. And I think, interestingly, one of the, I won't say gaps, but one of the groups that wasn't really looked at through this program were invertebrates, because of the broad diversity of invertebrates and the methodologies that were chosen here. But I think when we look at the microbat fauna, which their job is to convert invertebrate protein into vertebrate protein, they're doing pretty well in the reserve. With a high, well, we can see over half of the microbat species in New South Wales represented in Royal Heathcote and Garrawarra, and over 40% of all of the threatened species. So really important, significant stronghold for those. With the bird species, 234 recorded in the last 5 years. So that's including some additional data sets that have been drawn in, which is around about 70% of those suspected pre-European assemblages. There is undoubtedly more records that will be sort of added into the hundreds and thousands to fill that picture out. And that may also include some of the sort of grey data as well coming in through other sightings and other sightings databases too. Thanks, Vera. So we started this discussion around the reserves as kind of this threats assets matrix piece, working with the University of New South Wales. Obviously, these species here being currently endangered, critically endangered or otherwise, formed a focal part of that. The broad-headed snake is stable in terms of the population analysis that has been done here. I guess I would make this point that I have in other forums. We've been assessing its stability at the sites that it's known to be occupying, but we know that throughout the last few years we've had a number of additional records coming up, scattered through a couple of the different locations within both Royal and Heathcote, that suggests individuals are, not just focusing on those core habitat areas that have been sampled. We've had one at Engadine Station, one down found on the Upper Warrenora, and a few things like that. So I think what we've got are core monitoring sites where the population is stable, but we may actually have the species moving out more broadly. And it is an area that we're discussing just around what that monitoring might look like to try and validate that information. Prostranthera densa is doing quite well, but we do know that we've got some single age class stands in the landscape, and fire will be a really important aspect of its future management and conservation. Probably the next point around Rhodamnia is one that is of concern. But I guess without this work, we were not really seeing a lot of investment in this particular population of Rhodamnia. So it's not at the southern extent of its range. It was not well represented. In fact, it wasn't represented at all in some of the germplasm collections for the species conservation more broadly. So we know that it isn't doing well in any of the sites within the park. The preliminary environmental review for the Gary Road repair identified another stand of Rhodamnia, and we were able to include some individuals from that, or at least genetics from individuals from that, in the germplasm collection as well. What we're hoping is that off the back of this program, we've got a few actions that we want to undertake. First of all, to understand the number of individuals that we're dealing with within Royal National Park, because it does coppice and you can often have multi-trunked or multi-stemmed individuals. So are we dealing with one or many within those stands, to get a bit more of an understanding around the genetic situation, particularly for the Gary Road population. We may be able to work with transport post road remediation to actually do some site treatments. It's very accessible. It's in very close proximity to the road, and have a look at whether any of the myrtle rust treatments might actually enable us to support or bolster the survivorship of the individuals in that location, and then be able to extrapolate that out to some of the other stands of that species within the reserve. The challenge terps, scrub turpentine. Yes. Yep. And one of the key challenges for it is that the species wasn't doing well before this work. So we've come on, there's been a revisit of some of the existing stands. There's that other stand that's been found at Gary Road, and so hopefully we can see some further investment in this species within the reserve as well. But it is one that's a focal point for us. The rainforest, 64% of it being impacted by deer. I guess it's no surprise to most people in the room that the deer populations are sort of heavily stratified by vegetation type across the reserves. Heathcote's a bit different, but Royal certainly. And what we're able to then do is understand, where these animals are, where the impacts are, but also following our control programs, see change in these threatened communities now. Thanks, Vera. So water quality. I guess that this is one of those pieces that will be very topical, obviously off the back of some other incidents that occurred in regards to mining. I should just sort of flag early on that there was a very intentional distribution of these survey and sample sites to kind of top and tail some of the key drainage systems within the reserve. So it doesn't strike me as particularly surprising that those areas like Savile Creek, immediately behind the weir at Audley, and in that Bundina Gully have poor water quality, because it's right at the end at that urban interface where everything is draining to. However, these were point in time samples, and the data is what it is. What's quite interesting is that those East Coast drainages, so the ones that basically run east from Sir Bertram Stevens Drive, Guatemala, Mali, etc., because of the scoring methodologies that were there, the water quality was great, but the macroinvertebrate diversity was probably reduced, simply because those systems are pretty bony. There wasn't a lot of aquatic vegetation through them because they're heavily scoured into the landscape through there. But again, it's a great set of data for us to sort of work on and have a look at a bit more of the processes that we're going to take from here to better understand how these systems work. Most importantly, I think for the Hacking River itself, this data set actually gives us something to go back and talk to the surrounding land managers, particularly Wollongong Council, as a priority, to go, you got to help us with this stuff before it gets here. How do we go about managing that? How can we actually start to influence outside the reserve's footprint to try and get some improvements in what's actually flowing into that major drainage through the park? Thanks, Vera. So foxes, and I guess we're going to talk about deer as well. Foxes were detected at 85% of the sites. Now, that actually came as a surprise to me, because I genuinely expected them to be recorded at all of the locations. There's a little bit of commentary in some of Deb's feedback around the methodology for sampling, that they were predominantly, or they are exclusively, off-track sites. We were not using meat lures, etc. Despite that, we've actually got a fairly consistent view of what fox activity looks like in the landscape. And they were detected with monotonous regularity at these sites. So while it might not be the best method for sampling foxes, it proved to be a very consistent method for sampling foxes across the landscape. The second round, just very brief data collection, took that up to about 93% of locations actually had some fox activity during the sample period. The Roosa deer, again, you can see there, were detected at 44% of the monitoring sites. And the interesting thing for us from a management perspective is that those detections are kind of correlating to some of our key conservation assets, particularly around the rainforest systems that we're really focusing our protection on. I should just say that one of the pieces I want to take out of these programs is to be able to kind of draw some pictures on the maps. We know where the fox distribution is. We know where the Roosa deer distribution is. How do our management actions correlate to that distribution? Are we kind of over on the left-hand end where they're over on the right-hand end, in which case we're not really having an impact? Are we perfectly overlaid, which would be the ideal scenario? What we do know is that it's probably somewhere in between those two for both of those key disturbance factors. With the support around aerial shooting in the park for deer, that's been, I don't want to be too sort of blunt about it, but it has been a bit of a game changer for us in terms of the numbers of animals that we're able to remove from the reserves for a point unit of time. That number now is up, I think it's just ticked over 600 deer through our aerial programs over the last few years, comparing to, I think, in the order of about 2,000 deer across ground shooting of almost 20 years, if I've got that number correct. So very short space of time, high number of animals removed from the area. Most of those have been targeted in the northern parts of the park directly or in close association to our key conservation assets, particularly the rainforest areas. To the extent that we are seeing reduced take of deer, during these programs. So we've still got a bit of an analysis to do around that work. But, while it's a fairly brutal topic to discuss, but we're actually seeing less deer visible and present in those landscapes. So hopefully the next round of monitoring will be able to show a commensurate change in vegetation condition following the removal of those animals. Did you want to jump onto this one, Vera? Thank you. We're both on mute. You're still on mute.
Sorry, too many screens going at once. So we do have another scorecard which we're going to produce next year. So that's going to include more data. So we haven't analysed all of the audio data. So we're going to look at owl occupancy. There's been a round of koala surveys done this winter, spring. So we're going to include that information. We did contract some targeted greater glider surveys with the last proven record in 2021. But alas, there was no sign of greater glider. I'm still convinced they're there somewhere, but we just got to find another way of finding them. I kind of have this idea about a detection dog in my head, but I haven't talked to Brendan about that. So we do have another year of camera data with detections before and after fox baiting, and I'll show you that in a moment. We're going to analyse the vegetation with the BAM benchmarks to give us a bit of a baseline condition score, reference score, and also do a bit more data modelling because we do have a lot of data and a lot of potential covariates to maybe explain to us what's going on with the diversity around the landscape. So just these are the surveys that went on in spring and winter this year. So the kind of orange boxes, which are a bit hard to see, are koala surveys. So they did find koalas, but nowhere unexpected in Heathcote. And the red boxes were the greater glider surveys. So they targeted areas with big trees. And as I said, unfortunately, we didn't find any greater gliders. Doesn't mean to say they're not there. And this is some early modelling on the fox activity. So the green squiggly lines are the baiting lines. So this is 2023 baiting. So the pink triangles are within the baiting area and the green triangles are out of the baiting area. So we have data from 6 weeks before the baiting and 6 weeks after. And there's some pretty massive error bars on this because the fox detections were quite low because the plots are off track, not on trails where foxes actually do prefer to go. But we still had an effect. So there's a bit of effect down here where the baiting happened in week 6, and by week 8, it's actually a statistically significant effect. The activity of foxes dropped, but then climbed back up again by week 12. So we did have an initial drop, and I'd actually have done a little bit more mapping of the difference between activity in our sites from the outside border of the baiting envelope, and actually the sites within the middle of the baiting envelope, the activity actually dropped to 0 for a few weeks. So, and as Brendan will say, this was like the first round of aerial baiting that Reel's ever had, and there's been 2 more since. So hopefully that effect, the effect will compound over time and we'll get longer periods without foxes, even though when you create a vacuum, they do come back in. Do you want to say anything else about that, Brendan?
Yeah, look, one thing I just wanted to flag, the sites that you can see there, RHG 019 and 020, are probably, I would strongly suggest, are outside of our baiting zone. We did run a very conservative buffer for the first program. As you know, these programs can be sensitive. We've got a number of sensitive receivers around Bundina Main Bar and East Heathcote, etc. So the buffers that we applied were well in excess of the minimum requirements. We did make some adjustments for the second program, and we're in the currently looking at how those buffers will be adjusted for the programs in 2025. We've made the decision to effectively hold hold the buffers stable for each year, just because there is a lot of background work and mapping and approval and that in place. But needless to say, we want to ensure that we are able to deliver a safe and effective baiting program over as much of the landscape as we can. Um, and, Vera's been kind of spamming me with a few maps and graphs and things like that. And I do have to say that, the idea of that core of the baiting deliverable, which is probably up around the 8,000 hectare mark. I think that's really important to remember. It's not 30 square meters that was fox free for a period of time. It was probably about 8,000 hectares that was fox free for a period of time in terms of the detections at these locations. So these are great changes in the landscape, and we've got continued support to deliver these into the future as well, which I think is a really important outcome. When we know we were going to get some immigration. I've described it sort of briefly as having both my acceptance speech and my commiseration speech written for the first round of the program, going, look, if we didn't see anything, that's fine. It was the first time we were running this. We couldn't expect it. But then concurrently, that little piece of me hoping that we were going to see a statistically significant difference in the fox activity. What we should also see optimistically in the next rounds of monitoring are some changes in some of those sensitive receivers, particularly the beasties with shorter generation times, like long-nosed bandicoots. And I have sort of facetiously said previously that, success will come in the form of brush turkey and bandicoot complaints in surrounding suburbs. Rather than just in the data that we're collecting, because that's what we see as an outcome of the Northern Sydney baiting programs as well. So, there's a number of ways to get these indicators across the line. Thanks, Vera.
Okay, and finally, I put this slide in. We are part of the landscape because we may have a lot of impacts on landscape, but we're also the ones doing monitoring. And the EcoHealth program, the Scorecards program, is a very big program. It's very resource heavy. We rely on a massive amount of collaboration within and outside of the department. We have a lot of volunteers that work for us. The Friends of Royal are amazing. Not only do they tag royal photos, they've been tagging Greater Northern Forests and Greater Blue Mountains photos. We just can't give them enough photos. So thank you guys if you're listening. But we also have volunteers from within parks, outside of parks. And without all that help, we actually couldn't do what we do because we cover such a large area of New South Wales. Drive times are incredible, actually. And then finally, I actually saw that Brian put it in the chat, one of the web links, but they're the web links to the scorecards and the scorecard reports. So thanks. Brendan, do you have anything else you want to add?
I do. I'm going to just kind of throw something else in here around, and Brian may have heard me sort of jump on this soapbox before. While all of this is going on, we've still got sort of 6 odd million people a year that visit these reserves. And one of the kind of foundation pieces for me is that I think people understanding who they share the landscape with can actually assist them in treading a little more lightly. Australia is very lucky to have a whole range of cryptic nocturnal animals that share the landscape with us. And that's often really hard to communicate to visitors about the importance of the habitat or the sensitivity of the environment. What this program has done is capture some incredibly candid images and video sequences of not a generic swamp wallaby or a generic koala, but the actual swamp wallabies and koalas and edichinus and sugar gliders, etc., that exist within these reserve systems. And we're already in the early stages of developing some collateral and information that can share some of those photos with our visitors and the broader community to really give a sense of personality and connection through into the landscape as well about who we're sharing these amazing places with. I'm going to quickly see if I can share my screen, if you wouldn't mind stopping for a moment, Vera. I'm sure you've seen this 100 times, but that's okay. It's still one of the pieces that I think is... Let me know when you can see this.
Yep, got it, Brendan.
Excellent. So this is just one of the sequences that's been captured through this monitoring program.
She looks gorgeous.
Look at the baby.
Yeah. Oh, the baby's pretty cute too.
It strikes me as somebody heading to the beach with the arm out the window.
Yeah.
So it does go on a little bit. I guess what I'm getting at is that these images and sequences really give us an opportunity to give a personality to the landscape that we're charged to protect. And I think it's a great way for our customers to understand who they're sharing that landscape with. So as more of these little gems come out, there was a period of time where there was a kind of best of folder being developed through our fantastic Friends of Royals volunteers. Every time they'd see something interesting or cute, oh, got to check out this koala photo, would be bouncing around on a group chat. Got quite distracting for a while there. But anyway, happy to take a few questions as we go.
Thank
you for the
very much.
opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Vera. Did you get any media tarts in the animal world?
Oh, look, I'd have to say, like, it's difficult to identify individuals, but I've got to say, swamp wallabies have got an eye for a camera. There's photos with them pushed right up against it, checking it out. We've had a couple of males in combat, and you don't get to see that very often. There's, the odd levitating bandicoot photo where one just appeared in midair and seemed to hover through the image sequence was quite strange, but yes.
Okay. Gary, go ahead.
Yes. Look, I think I saw a slide there that summarised, I think it was 4 ecological threats, and I only wrote down one of them before it moved on, and that was weeds. But of course, we know that humans are a major ecological threat. That's already been acknowledged by Brendan, of course.
Yep.
Now, since this project is supposed to inform management, I wonder if Brendan can think generally about the sort of data that has been collected, but now think specifically about a pending or existing major impact on Royal National Park as NPA sees it, and that is the amount of mountain intensity of mountain bike riding, for which the detailed design has not been yet done. We've got a picture of interlacing fragmented landscape. We've got submissions that have enumerated indicative tracks going through threatened ecological communities, some lengths of them, and being near threatened species. Brendan, can you give us an idea of how you might use this data to address real human impacts like that one?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think that's a great question. Because we've got these sites, there's 40 of these sites scattered throughout the park, while we're not necessarily able to robustly compare between individual cameras because there's a whole lot of variables. We will expect to pick up trend data through here. So we'll see changes or differentials between species detections at certain sites. I don't think it is meant to be a finite or discrete study about the impacts of one particular disturbance or otherwise. But I would imagine that when the interface, the BI or the Power BI interface is there, Gary, that you could scan those sites nominally within some of these areas of disturbance, and we may be able to see that there were some differential detections of some species. The vegetation plots that are established through those same locations, and I do know that there is an overlay between some of these sites and those mountain bike hubs, if you like, will actually assist us too as we start to build data points with changes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
I can see one from Helen about will they be part of a previous survey? Sorry, did I miss something there, Helen? Will what be part of a future survey?
Oh, I
just
asked
got
whether shorelines were part of the program.
Right. Sorry, I missed that bit.
And Brian says shorelines might actually not be within the park.
It depends on the boundary. And I'm still confused as to exactly where the boundary is in Royal.
And most of the sites are actually stratified on vegetation community, so it's probably suggesting they're not well represented.
Yeah. Ross.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan and Vera. I was interested in with this presentation because as a working in parks in the past, I understand a little bit about park management, Brendan, as you would know. And having worked in Royal for a period back in the 80s, it's interesting to see how a data-driven process has really advanced park management. But I suppose the question was, I read the report, I read Deb Andrews' comments. I was wondering a couple of things. One was, to what degree is the scorecard going to impact park management on a day-to-day basis?
Mm-hmm.
So you partially answer that in the presentation. But the other angle was, to what degree is the methodology adaptive to change over time? For example, with eDNA, which you know about occurring in Royal.
Mm.
But then that has presumably an impact on how you can compare one scorecard to another if you're changing the methodology along the way. So it's, I'm curious. I mean, I'd like to see the methodology changed and improved, but then how the scorecard is comparable presumably has some analytical challenges. So there's a couple of questions in there you might like
I think there's three, in fact, but that's okay. I guess to your first point around how this data will be used, I think we're really in the early stages of interrogating it. And I have to say that for much of the data that we've got, you may notice no trend lines in the report because we've got a single data point. Some of these species and variables that we're measuring will also be far more responsive than others. And I think vegetation change is one that's going to have a much longer timeline for us to really understand what's happening in these systems. It's probably quite, I think, going to pay some dividends around post-fire programs and these sorts of things where you can start to monitor and get some data on recovery of some of those systems, post-hazard reduction, et cetera. I think the points that Vera drew out before around some of those species or variables that we're not identifying well at the moment is absolutely true. We know that there's some things that we're not currently monitoring particularly well or had data gaps in as far as the scorecard goes. And this is a learning curve. I mean, there's a few processes that have been gone through here, and I made this comment previously when I was chatting to Sutherland Environment Centre. I think one of the things that is really very interesting about this is that if we think about collecting this sort of data volume in previous iterations of methodologies where we were looking at, pitfall trapping or Elliott trapping or cage trapping or similar, the ethical implications of this kind of extensive data collection would have been massive. And what we have now is a range of methodologies that are enabling us to do that, not without impact, but with a far lesser impact. And it makes the repeatability of these a lot more tolerable and palatable to deliver. So I think that's something that we haven't really talked about it in terms of the methodology, but I know, having spent some time sitting on a few ethics committee programs, if you're sitting there saying, look, what we want to do is capture about 500,000 of these animals, once people regain consciousness, you might have been able to have that conversation with them. So that's something that is, I think, really helpful in the discussion. And to your point around, and I'll pass over to Vera in a moment, but to your point about adapting the program, the first thing was to almost a proof of concept, and I was really happy to see Royal, Heathcote and Garrawarra used as a pilot program. I'd like to think I've been as supportive of this work as I could possibly be, and it's been very exciting to be part of. But we could see that we had an absence of some of the arboreal mammals, for example, turning up, and the team has been incredibly responsive to go, okay, we know they're there, but we're not picking them up in these data profiles. So how do we go about adapting the methodology so that we can then bring that guild, for want of a better phrase, into the system? Because getting it right means that as long as the other methodologies are staying remarkably consistent, we then turn on that method across each of the reserves that are monitored over time in sequence, and then you've actually got a comparable data set. Vera, did you want to make some other comments there?
Yeah, so just on that point of adaptability, so I guess we continue to call this a pilot program, like the 8 sites a pilot program, because we don't know if what we're doing, the number of sites that we're doing, and the spacing between the sites. So in Royal Hickory, Garrawara, they're actually quite close together, whereas in our larger reserves, they're much, much further apart. So we don't know at this point whether it's actually going to produce the data that we want it to. So when all the sites get done, we're going to do a huge, not me, someone else is going to do a big power analysis on all the data to see whether we're actually getting the data that we need and need to measure change over time. As far as adaptability, absolutely, we're very adaptable. As you know, technology is improving so fast. I guess looking into the future, like one of the things we did, as Brendan said, was we've put cameras on brackets on trees, which are catching, we put them in Greater Blue Mountains, the small gliders, which are all through Royal as well. So we're getting the feather tails and the the Ptoruses gliders, which we didn't really catch on the ground cameras. So that's just like a little improvement as far as detecting different species guilds. But, you know, down the track, all these cameras are going to be beaming up to, you know, Wi-Fi networks. They're going to be going straight into like hard drives. And of course, all that AI will be happening, but it's not happening yet. But yeah, and then, you know, even your sort of larger gliders, you know, spotlighting has turned to drone surveys. You know, that seems to be the way forward. So, yeah, I mean, and some of these technological advantages do make it difficult to compare over time. But I think when you do get a better survey methodology and you capture more information, you learn straight away more about a population. Perhaps they're not as rare as you thought they would because different methods capture them better. So, yeah, it's definitely an adaptable program.
Ross,
Can you speak?
You've got your hand up still, Ross. Is a follow-up for you, or?
Yeah, just the item about eDNA. Do you see that
Yes.
technology assisting or
Well,
being
funny that
included
you
in
mention it
something?
because we have an eDNA project coming up. So at the moment we have 2 different researchers who are going to put, and this is a new thing, mosquito eDNA, and we haven't finalized the details, but basically they put up a mosquito trap and test the eDNA in the mosquitoes, which could be any animal that it's bitten, and you can get like a whole bunch of different species through that technique.
You can go for sandflies. You'll discover Gary Dunnett wandering around.
So yes, and I mean obviously that's the eDNA is quite well known for water species as well. So it's not something we're doing at the moment. I mean all these things cost money, but yeah, they're definitely open to different people doing different survey methodologies. We don't have this groups we aren't capturing. We haven't captured the reptiles yet because we don't really want to deal with snakes.
Oh.
And the frogs, we've got some audio stuff on the frogs, but maybe that's not the best way to do frogs. Maybe the eDNA might be better for frogs. We don't know yet.
Yeah, and just touching on that comment, Vera, one of the elements coming out of the platypus monitoring as well was the use of time-lapse cameras. And we've started a conversation about, well, given how interesting some of the image suites coming out of those time-lapse cameras were, would they have an applicability to basking sites or similar for something like broad-headed snakes? So that we're not relying on an intrusive method, but if you could set that up in a site, you know, you can set them to come on in this time and this time, and then just go through and do some data assessment. You might be able to have something that can be a bit more dispersed through the landscape because the intensity of data collection is reduced, but actually enable you to passively monitor some of these key habitat features. So it's almost the kettle bubbling. We could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And it is really leading to some quite exciting innovations in this work.
CK, before I go to you and your next of call, I'm going to follow up with a sort of a question that Brendan and Gary Dunnett and I think Ross will probably understand almost instantly is how sustainable is this project in terms of budget and
Took away
time.
my question.
And I keep thinking about the fate of the State of Parks report. Can we actually carry it forward and follow it up? It's very expensive, both in terms of collecting data and in terms of analysing it. And I worry that it might just go the death of other programs that have been well-meaning when they started.
Well, you worry
great
and we
question.
worry. We have 23 people in our unit and we're just so strapped for time because we have so much to do.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the project has been funded on a Environment Trust grant, which ends in a year. We don't know at this point whether it's going to be part of like the parks recurrent funding, but I do drop hints every so often to my director about having a job next year. And he said, you don't have to worry about that. So maybe they have plans, but it's just like, I mean, as you would know, biodiversity programs have come and gone over the decades.
Oh,
and
yes. Yeah.
I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately.
Okay.
Can I approach that?
I think I could probably follow that up in another forum, but go on, Brendan. Yes.
Well, can I approach that just from another angle, though? I think the other piece that this program does is allow us to say, and we've chatted about this before around things like service delivery commitments and things where what we've got are some really solid outcomes here. There is this group's interest and support, which I'm ever thankful for, helps us show results.
Yeah.
This is the data that we've collected. This is what we're seeing from a fox baiting perspective. This is what we're seeing from a deer controls perspective. Oh, look at this amazing set of images around eastern pygmy possums, etc. These are actually now quantifiable and tangible deliverables. And so I think that it's a very useful program in terms of giving visibility to things that were often difficult to give visibility to. And I do think that its overtness is a very good position to be in. There may be some arguments about periodicity and how often these programs may be repeated. However, when I look at, again, I come back to the time and energy that would be required to capture 500,000 animals out of Elliott traps. It is a remarkably efficient program.
Yeah.
Led by some incredibly passionate people. So, what we're seeing are the results here. And if we want to actually track trajectories of some of our systems, I think this is a really great step forward.
Yeah, thanks. CK, go for it. And thank you for waiting. You are muted at the moment. Yeah.
You're still on mute.
I'll only answer questions if people are on mute when they ask them.
CK, you're still on mute. You're going to have to unmute.
Relax, Ian. She's looking for the button.
It's on the screen.
It's at the bottom on the screen. Yeah.
Well, if you go to the three dots at the top of your square,
Or
next to it,
bottom
there's
left.
a mute, unmute.
We unmute her. We can unmute her, can't we?
I'm not sure if I can.
Feel free to type it in as well if you wish, and we can.
Yeah, type it over in the chat line if you prefer. But if you hover your screen, your cursor on the bottom line,
CK.
you'll see.
Wait on. I'll.
You?
Oh, there we go.
Network.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry. I'm interested in, I was sent an email, I think a few months ago, about a shooting program for cats, feral cats in national parks. Is there any moves afoot about dingoes and having them reclassified as not wild dogs? Because my understanding is that there's more and more science that basically suggests that it is a native animal and it can have positive impacts on the environment and resilience. And Brian's laughing and he knows what I'm talking about.
I think it's a great thought.
I just don't understand why.
Where dingoes are in the landscape, foxes
That's
tend
right.
to drop off very quickly. Yes.
And they're an apex predator. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not even going to dive into that discussion, CK. We've not had any detections of them in Royal Heathcote or Garrawarra.
So it's not relevant to here. Yes, that's
No.
true. It is to other places though.
But with that said, Brian and CK, to your question, there have been some historic records, particularly on the western edge of Heathcote, that may have a relevance to how we expand or consider expanding the fox baiting program, noting that there can be some pressures there. But at this stage, we don't have dingo records in the area. To your comment about cats, though, we have had a couple. I think we're up to less than 10 total detections across the EcoHealth program and some monitoring that was done around the platypus reintroduction locations as well. So for whatever reason, they're there in very low numbers based on the detection methods that are available to us at the moment, which is quite interesting. I don't really have a robust explanation for it, but we just don't see them in the landscape.
Did you see the study that was done about Karakarang? So Karakarang, they found evidence of dingoes that had been buried with Indigenous people in such a way that suggested that they are incredibly important. And well, there's no Indigenous people around, well, not that many anyway. But I'm just uncomfortable that there'd be better ways of dealing with foxes and feral cats. But that's a state thing.
Yeah, just on the dingo thing for our program though, like it's, as Brendan said, it's a very complex discussion which could take all night. So go into it either. But at our other sites, we have mile lakes in the Blue Mountains. There is known populations of dingoes. So we actually internally are having discussions about how we can include them in these scorecards.
Yeah. I think CK is fully aware that the politics behind the difference between a dingo and a wild dog is a fraught one across the state. And
Very fraught.
and I will leave it at that at this stage, but I have sympathies for your position. Gary, you have your hand up first ahead of Ian, I think.
Oh, yes, certainly. The only thing I want to say is I was stimulated by the comment that, you're leaving snakes alone for the time being, and also mentioned amphibians. We happen to have in our branch of NPA one of Australia's top amateur herpetologists, Ken Griffiths, who's done authorship of snake books and that sort of thing.
Yep.
We've had people in the past like Pat Ackersdyke, a very skilled amateur botanist who assisted Royal National Park in identifying the location of threatened species before all this sort of advanced technology even existed. We've got people who have within NPA and Sutherland Environment Centre, people like Sarah Jo Lobwine, who's done eDNA. eDNA projects have taken many parts of the world by storm with massive citizen science activities. With 1 million images and the massive data that is being accumulated, is there not a place for embracing skilled people within organisations like NPA, like really adopting them in a big way to use the experience they've had in their working life? Look at Ross here. I was a bit of a zoologist in my time and a teacher, education. Brian, a historical expert. Ian up here, a geologist. So my question is, what value do you put on embracing real participation by the community in all these fantastic projects that we're just dying to support you with?
Absolutely, we put a lot of value on it. I guess there's two things there. We've really embraced the Friends of Royal, and we have one staff member, Bree, who works out of Orderly, and she looks after that. So that's great. If people come to us like Ross, with his eDNA, we're happy to, help that facilitate that. So, there's definitely, there needs to be that contact. We need to be able to facilitate it. We also have to have the capacity to incorporate it into our program. So we're definitely open to considering
We've
community
asked,
involvement.
we've asked several times, including the sampling, the eDNA for platypus, for example. We've approached National Park Service locally about regeneration projects at the additions to Heathcote National Park. And in both those cases, for example, we got no answer, right? We got no answer. And yet, Worldwide Fund for Nature, fantastic big organisation, does great things, leadership of some of these projects. But I strongly would suggest that people within government make sure they do understand the quality and the resource that is there, at least for the asking. People can always say no, but we'd really like to be more involved.
I think, Gary, I'll speak to that. Like, there's a bit of cross promotion going on here, and there's a few heads in the room that wear a few different hats. Yes, I'm looking at you, Mr. Hill. Let's be honest. So it really is about where those programs sit. And I know that there was some work going on around the platypus. Like, I get that was a partnership that was already underway. I think as far as the Eco Health program goes, the volunteer commitment and passion that's driven the photo processing and the like has been, I don't just want to say important, it's actually been foundational to move this work along. So that's a really easy entrance point there. And I think the challenge for rolling out sort of on-ground programs, like hypothetically, taking Ken's, or your comment around Ken Griffin, is that how do we do that and actually link it into the program delivery, which is around not just the 40 sites in Royal, Heathcote and Garrawarra, but find an equivalent resource to deliver that program at a state level across all of the monitoring sites. So I think to Vera's comments around bringing the herpetofauna into the program, it's about identifying methods that can enable a better suite of detections for that species or the fauna group that can actually be rolled out across all of these different locations rather than just a local Royal, Heathcote, Garrawarra specific one. I think we're still going to be gathering, like one of my rangers was out in Heathcote the other day and was pulling out some rubbish that somebody had dumped and came across a little underwoody saurus milii juvenile there. Was not 100% certain about what it was, but I nearly fell off my chair when I got sent the photo because I was very excited to see it. We do still have to pull some of those data points back into the system so that they will inform those records recorded in the last 5 years when the next program kind of ticks around. So we're actually building all of those data sets as we go forward through not just the data captured during the program, but from some of those other data sets that are coming out through, iNaturalist, the iSpy koala stuff, and all of that is being dragged into.
Yeah. Ian, you did have your hand up. It's
Yeah,
gone
look,
down.
for some reason, it just keeps on going up and down when
I keep putting it down, Ian.
Oh, okay.
Very
It's
smart.
Totally,
Very
totally
smart.
understandable. Totally understandable. Can I put my hand up and use
Sure,
Gary's
fine. You
hand
get
up?
one. Yes.
I'm chairing it, not Brendan. Go ahead, Ian.
I was going to save the hard one up, but Brian already asked that one question, so that's fine. Two easy questions, I would imagine. Reference to Vera's mapping, or the mapping that she showed rather in the scorecard showing the water sources. I was intrigued that Karakarang Creek seemed to have poor quality water. You would imagine that there's very few sources at the headwaters of that would pollute it. So I've got a question on that one.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
I'll just start with that.
I'm happy to kind of jump into that, Ian. Yeah, look, Vera will be well aware of me going, what's going on with some of these East Coast drainages? And the reason being is that because of the I guess the classification and the accumulation of those results, I'm not sure if it's Signal. There's a nationally recognized rating system in there that we're relying on for this to actually give them a score. And because it is a relatively, I guess, small scale creek, for want of a better phrase. It doesn't have deep pondages. It's missing out on a range of the invertebrate diversity that you would see in other areas. It doesn't have the extensive sort of macrophyte beds and that you would see in other locations either.
So the scores goes down.
Correct. And I must if you have a look at the water quality parameters, like they're spot on, but the fact that those other attributes are contributing to the score actually pulls that down a little bit. I was at some pains in the report to kind of get some discussion around that, because it does look a little bit misleading, and I certainly was a bit concerned about it. But it's actually about seeing all of the data set together, and noting that that particular score is made up of not just the chemical elements of it, pH, etc., but also some of these other elements.
No question as to why there's pollution in the upper hacking around Kelly's Creek, with the various disturbances and about 10 different point sources of pollution that can get to that. But yeah, that's why I had the question about that. Second was just Rhodamia rubescens. You and I do love that plant. I was just thinking that the stand that's not too far from Red Cedar Flat, you mentioned the one at Gary was fairly accessible, but wouldn't you also agree that that's also fairly reasonably accessible, the stand there?
I think they're an order of magnitude difference a little bit, Ian. Like you can reach out from the road deck and touch the ones on Gary.
You have to walk to.
Yeah, so when we talk, and look, it may be possible, but when we talk about some of the treatments that are potentially available, they're monthly applications and these sorts of things. So it's not a no, but in terms of going a proof of concept, the population on Gary Road seems to be the one that we should be focusing on.
Best wishes with that then.
Okay, and here is the question now. Having got this scorecard, having identified myrtle rust as a major threat, what will be the response?
Yeah, so we've chatted about that a couple of times, Brian. I think one of the things that it's done is immediately allow us to put a little bit more pressure on getting some of that genetic material into the ex situ populations to make sure that it is represented. That's the first thing that we identified, and that's already been done. It's also highlighted and raised the profile of the work that we need to do around this species. And, many of you in the room will know that, when you get a threatened species, you've got sort of range, the populations at the end of range tend to get the most excitement because they represent the capacity for the species to adapt to change and resilience. In this particular case, we've got one that's, the population in Royal sits kind of, I think we're under 100 Ks, but, from the southern limit of the species. And so what we're chatting about with some of these treatment options, Brian, is to be able to go, well, first of all, let's get some genetics done of the stands that we have, because if it's a clonal stand, we've actually, rather than counting populations, we might be counting individuals, and we might come up with 6, and that would be fairly dire for the species in Royal. The second thing that I'd like to see us try is work with, and we've already made some contacts through the bot gardens around treatment strategies that may be possible. If I'm telling anyone in here to suck eggs, just let me know. But the myrtle rust is most active and damaging to the rapidly growing areas of the plant, so new growth, and particularly around some of the reproductive meristematic tissue, so flower, fruit set, etc. So one of the couple of sort of thought bubbles that we're running through, can we maintain better leaf stand on individuals through some of these treatments, particularly allowing them to establish new leaf? And then if we can time some of our treatments in situ, and we've got to go through REFs and a range of approvals to do so, we might be able to enable flowering and then subsequently fruit set on some of these and get some sexual reproduction going on in the populations as well. So it's an interesting problem because of the proximity of some of these to accessible sites. Some of these treatments may actually be feasible to deliver in some of the stands in Royal. And it's not been trialled as far as I'm aware. We do know some of the chemicals are effective, but it's that ability to go in on a month-by-month basis and actually treat them when they need it that's really been a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Oh,
I,
hey.
I can see Ian twitching, but thanks.
Judy, have you got any questions about the forthcoming newsletter that you would like to raise at this stage?
If anybody has any articles that they would like to forward to me,
You
that
mean
would
on something on the eco health stuff even?
be right. I think you should do it for me.
Judy, you're just not subtle enough. Do pick up that I did put the hyperlink in and Vera also put it at the back of her slideshow, but the hyperlinks are still available in the chat there. And if you've clicked it online, you can make sure that you can protect that for later use, but it's not too hard to find.
Thank you.
I have included the memo list for the 3 reserves in it as a contribution. Wasn't hard to write. I just cut and pasted, basically. Very interesting. A lot of people wouldn't know what vertebrates are in Royal National Park.
No.
Okay, I'm going to sort of, before I finish off, we'll go back to the survey approach. Vera, a technical question, I guess, about surveying. We've had 2 good seasons, so to speak. They've both been moist. They've both 5, yeah. That will have skewed the results considerably. At what stage will we be planning, if we get the funding and you get employed, but at what stage would you predict we should do another one in order to be able to balance the results after those good seasons?
So the word is, if the program continues, that the surveys will probably be every 2 to 3 years. So Royal has had 2 years, and it could have had another one this year. But what we're actually doing this year is we have it's called the cat monitoring team, but what they're going to be putting in is a different sort of camera setup. So they're going to be putting like a single camera on a 500-metre grid over a large area. So I think they're planning to put in 150 cameras on this grid in Royal Heathcote and Gurrara for cats, but it will also get deer and foxes. So we should, and all the other animals as well. But what it'll do, it'll give us predator densities, which we don't have from the kind of widespread surveillance occupancy model.
Yeah.
So there will be another survey this year. It's different. It'll give us different metrics, but then hopefully next financial year, we'll do another lot of the surveillance monitoring.
I can see the treasurer shaking in his boots at the thought of doing these surveys every 2 years, but good luck.
Yeah, I think 3 years is probably more realistic because it takes us a whole year to analyze the data. But like what we're collecting is not monitoring yet because we've only got 1 year. It's not like, as you said, we've had some really good seasons. And I mean, like I'm actually live up in the Blue Mountains and we're having another cicada year. I don't know if they've hit the plains yet, but I'm like, oh, there's another good season, like so much food in the ecosystem, you know. So what we're monitoring will be changed over time. And we know they're going, well, we know we're going having good seasons, like in a lot of New South Wales where we had the fire, even though we're having good season, we're having the post-fire recovery with good season. So, and then we can compare to the older surveys as well to see sort of differences as well, even though they're not directly comparative. I think it just, I think really, and I don't know, I could be just making this up, but, you know, after those 1920 fires, there was all these metrics thrown around about animals burnt and what died. But the reality is no one really knew, no one really knows because we didn't have this broad-scale monitoring across the landscape. And I think this program sets us up for any kind of large-scale event. We'll actually be able to see the change over time.
Yeah. Crossing fingers. I won't even ask you, Brendan, about the potential of a big fire through Royal at this stage because it's going to happen sometime soon. Cheryl, you have a last question.
I'll see if I can unmute her.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if the monitoring of the platypus are done by UNSW or National Parks and what they're up to. There were 10 plus 1 puggle the last I heard.
Correct. So the team were out there currently from UNSW, and then we're doing a little bit of skill sharing at the moment, Cheryl. So the team were out there last Tuesday, Wednesday, grabbing the transceivers again. So they will actually be able to give us an update on who was bouncing around. The last data set was in April, if I recall. No, July, I lie. 7 individuals were detected during that period, out of the 11 with transmitters. Now, that's not terrible because that included 2 individuals that hadn't been detected for, I think, about 3 months. So they kind of pop back into the detector arrays. So ultimately, if we're looking at something in the order of 7 to 8 animals coming through and being detected and some combination of the 11 marked individuals, we're quite comfortable with that as a success program. It's also just, and I don't want to sort of speak out of turn here, but there are some distinct activity patterns that were identified in the monitoring results. So individual females moving past these receivers were detected at certain times of day, at certain intensities, and then vanished off the profile for a period of time. Now, we know that, and you probably saw the media around it, but we had the little puggle that was captured, who was named Gilly, which means flame in the Darawal language, and her parents were Prometheus and Pandora. So if you know your mythology, we've got, Prometheus bringing fire in and Pandora giving us some secrets. So we also know that another female, apart from Pandora, showed the same behavioral patterns. So it's probable that there was a second breeding event that was that occurred, but we don't have any information around their survivorship at this point because the animal wasn't captured and wasn't part of the sort of transceiver monitoring program. But we are in some discussions now around, so when the translocation proposal was approved, from a genetic perspective, an ideal outcome is that there are up to 20 individuals that would come into the population to ensure that they've got the best chance of survivorship. And so we are sort of in early stages of discussing the sort of reinforcement of those individuals. I should just be crystal clear with everyone here that the survivorship, we were looking at anything above 50% as being an outstanding success over that first 6-month period. So we got to 10 and a bit months with a reproductive event occurring, with 8 of the 10 founder animals still being detected, which was just so far in excess of what we had expected and hoped for, to as kind of, the little prediction I'd written in my envelope in my desk drawer didn't bear any resemblance to that. So it was a really, we were very much buoyed by that success.
Thank you.
I think we should probably now call it quits. I think when I was away,
before we do, Brian, can I just be terribly rude? So I just note that Janet's joined us, and we hadn't seen each other for about 25 years, and now it's twice. It's twice in 2 weeks. So lovely to see you again, Janet.
Have you got any? I know you've joined very late, Janet, but have you got any questions that you'd like to ask him? You're on mute if you do want to speak.
Hang on, I'll see if I can unmute her.
Janet, you're talking to the ether. You're not unmuted. Got it. Yep.
I was talking to Brendan and delighted to talk to Brendan last Tuesday. And no, I don't have any particular questions to ask now. And I'm sorry I didn't tune in at the beginning. But anyway, I see that it's being recorded. So that's
it is being recorded and it will be available. Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great to see you, Brendan.
Thanks, Janet. You too.
Okay. And What I was going to say is, in my absence, Judy, I think your name was floated as the person to give the thank you little speech.
Just like to thank Brendan and Vera for such an informative and interesting discussion. Thank you very much, and an insight into the Royal National Park, the Garrawarra and Heathcote. It sounds like a fantastic opportunity to see just see what's out there.
Thank you for the opportunity, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Totally thrilled to have you both here, Vera and Brendan. And
Brian, I think we should also thank them for working extra time, given the fact they go 9 to 5 or whatever.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much, Brendan and Vera.
Absolutely. And in November, I think what we will do is not have our Zoom meeting, but call our branch meeting for our members, the Koala Film over in Hurstville. What do you think, Gary?
Yes, that's a good idea.
Cheers. Thank you all very, very much. And
thanks all.
And I will catch up with Gary on the phone at some stage, probably in the next day or two, if you're
thanks, Vera.
Hanging around.
Okay.
Cheers. Good night all.
Okay, good night. Okay.